Welcome back. I hope you had a wonderful lunch. We had a wonderful lunch here. We had some seafood entree, followed by beef Wellington, and then some very exotic cheesecake. And Dan Walker and Jessica Mauboy dropped in to sing a few songs just to symbolise our friendship between New Zealand and Australia. None of that's true, but we did have a nice lunch. We hope you did too. And of course, our friendship with New Zealand is going to be demonstrated in the next presentation. So we're very fortunate, and many people have been looking forward to this presentation from Jill Worrall, who is a retired senior lecturer, board director and social work consultant, and Kate Blundell, who's the chief executive of the Grandparents Raising Children Trust in New Zealand. And we've been looking forward to, we've been mentioning some things about New Zealand during the earlier presentations during the day. So we're very, very excited to hear directly from Jill and Kate. So I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And tēnā koutou katoa, and haere mai from New Zealand. Here we are. So it's great to be talking across the divide to you from level 3 lockdown here. But as Meredith said earlier, we were specifically asked to present our journey to securing parity with foster carers. And this one has been a big thing and quite a journey. I'm just going to start off talking about the beginnings of the journey, and Kate's going to pick up that and take you for the more recent part of our journey and where we are now, the exciting place that we've come to. So if we could have slide 1, thanks, Thomas. So we're just going to go through finding the facts, what we did, the results of the facts and the resistance that we experienced, and then the pathway to success Kate's going to pick up and just exactly where we are now. So the next slide, thanks, Thomas. So in New Zealand, our legislation, which was passed in 1989, was pretty, it was one of the first in the world that mandated kinship care. And not only did it mandate it, it said very clearly that children must be placed with an extended family and that social workers should look to the end of the extended family to find them. And it also says in the Act legally that kinship carers must be given all the support that they need to be able to successfully care for the children. So while it said all that, unfortunately, that didn't necessarily happen. And it took a while for kinship care to actually get on the way. I think that was because of social workers' resistance to placing with an extended family. And I would hasten to say racism and all sorts of reasons why that didn't happen. But when it did start to happen, in 1989 and 1996, I did my master's. And let's go on from there. So the next slide, thanks, Thomas. Okay, so in my master's, you always get surprised when you do research, and one of my surprises was the number of single carers in my grandparent sample. And as you can see there, I'll just take myself out of this picture here. As you can see there, well over 30%, 35% were single. And they had an extra struggle, and particularly an extra struggle for finances. And so the next big surprise I got, if I could have the next slide, thank you, Thomas, was you can see here the inverse relationship between partnered caregivers and unpartnered in the blue. So what we found was, particularly the unparted, the single ones, were struggling, and a huge, so 45 out of that 30-odd% were actually existing in under 20,000 a year. And the stories that they told were heart-wrenching. Like, I never thought I'd ever have to go to get a food parcel. I've had to go to the Salvation Army for clothes for the children. I feel really embarrassed. I'm losing my house because I'm in a little flat and I can't possibly care for the children there, and I'm wondering how on earth I'm going to provide the rent. So there were all those things which have mirrored some of the stuff that we've already heard this morning. So I think that what I'm saying is that it was beginning, it was invisible. I have to say it was invisible, that carers were under the radar, particularly grandparent carers. And the other thing that came out of the research was the numbers of carers who were not still attached to protective services, to Child, Youth and Family. Child, Youth and Family had been encouraging them to actually take guardianship. And so once they took guardianship for the children, they were off the books and they had to struggle on their own. So could you take the next slide? Thanks. So this is what we found. We found non-mandated grandparents, like you've been talking about this morning. Many of them had taken the children because they saw the issues that the grandchildren were actually suffering, that the parents were largely, the largest reason for actually taking children into care has been drug abuse, and particularly P. They had no support. They suffered financial stress, and even those that were married suffered financial stress. The grandchildren, as has already been pointed out this morning by many of your speakers, had suffered huge trauma, and the behaviours that these grandparents were coping with was enormous, but not only their psychological trauma, but also a lot of physical difficulties that they had. We also found that these women on grandparents often had multiple caregiving roles. Not only were they caring for the children, but they were caring often for the mother of the children who had mental health issues or physical issues. So, but we also found that when we went to people and said, are you receiving any benefit? They would say no. They had a huge resistance to notifying income support about their children's parental incompetence. So they were taking the path that maybe we will struggle on here. We don't want the state nosing into our business. So we took our research to government. We went down there, some GIG representatives and myself, went down to government. We got an appointment with the head of what was then called Child, Youth and Family. And we said, we brought you the research. There is nothing done. When you passed the act, you didn't put in a piece of longitudinal research, but we've done this. We put it across the table to him. He caught it with his hand and pushed it back to us and said, not interested in research. And we were devastated. So that was some of the beginning of the resistance that we experienced from government. So one more slide, I think. Thanks, Tom. One more slide. Okay, and so Kate's going to pick it up from here because now, you've also talked this morning, just before Kate picks it up, a lot about data gathering from census. And we eventually got our 2013 census to show about grandparents. One of the things I'll just say before I hand over to Kate is that one of the sad things about our research was our difficulty in engaging Maori families. And indeed, Maori families are probably doing the bulk of kinship care because over 69%, about 69, from 66 to 69% of children in the care of the state are actually Maori, when they're only 15% of our population. And there's also the issue of Maori families having something called whāngai, whereby a child is given to the grandparents to raise, not because of care and protection issue, but it's a cultural issue. So I'll just pass it on to Kate now. Kate, you can look at, if you don't mind picking it up now.
Thanks, Jill. Kia ora and greetings to you all in Queensland and elsewhere tuning in. Thanks for this opportunity to share our perspectives with you. If we can just go back to the previous slide, Thomas, yes. So building on Jill's points, my focus really is to share where we've got to today, why we've been so successful in achieving greater degree of parity in the level of financial support available for kinship carers as compared to children being raised in by state-approved foster carers. Hopefully there'll be some tips in there that you can take on board in getting better support and recognition in Australia. So our population is around 5 million people, and to put that into context, it's about the size of your Queensland population. And based on various data points and estimates, we believe there's around about or over 30,000 children living in alternative care placements, both in statutory and non-statutory care. And what I mean by that, when I refer to statutory care, that's care where the state actually has control over the care of the child. Non-statutory care includes both the kinship care, where there are no guardianship or parenting orders, and care where there is a grandparent with a guardianship order via the family court. So as Jill's mentioned, it's really difficult for us to get accurate numbers. Our 2018 census was a terrible mess, first time online. But based on our research and the figures we can access, we know that roughly 85% of children in care of someone other than their parents are in non-state care placements, and 80% of them are with their grandparents. As Jill has mentioned, 69% of the children in state care are Māori, and within our own organisation, we have a similar profile for children in the care of their grandparents or someone else in the family. And Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Trust was established in 2001. It's a national registered charity, and we currently support over 5,700 families, representing over 9,000 full-time carers and over 16,000 children. So 93% of our carers are grandparents, 1% are great-grandparents, and 6% are other kin or whānau carers, as we call them in New Zealand. For children being raised by someone other than their parents in circumstances, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the definition of an eligibility for the financial support. So if children are raised by someone other than their parents in circumstances where their parents have died or they have a serious disability or missing, there's the orphans benefit, much like your double orphans benefit. And for others where there's been a family breakdown or their parents have been unable to care, and as Meredith has mentioned earlier, we have the unsupported child benefit, which is via our social security legislation, and that's administered by the Ministry for Social Development. Now, this support is available for non-statutory care and informal care arrangements, provided you meet that criteria of a family breakdown. And until recently, you also had to show that you were likely to be the primary carer for at least a year. If we go over to the next slide, so thank you. So the state paid and approved carers receive the foster care allowance under a different legislation, and it's administered by the Ministry for Children. So we've got to a point now where the gap between the level of financial support for state paid foster carers and non-statutory kinship carers has been reduced incrementally over the past 12 years. And the weekly base rates for each child for all of these allowances are now the same. And so we've made great strides since 2014, and actually enshrining in policy additional supports for the children as well in non-state care. And I'll talk more about that shortly. But this slide I really wanted to show you because it it supports what Jill found in the earlier studies in 2005 and 2009. And it shows that the census, significantly sole care grandparents, 72% of them had a household income of less than 30,000. And we knew that many of them couldn't access the unsupported child benefit because they were on national super and they couldn't satisfy the 1-year rule. They couldn't satisfy the criteria that they'd be likely to be caring for more than 12 months. And this was particularly tough on so many grandparents in this situation. And the research that we did in 2016 really helped build on the research that Jill did in 2005 and 2009. And we really found that we had so many more data points to show the kind of socioeconomic issues that these grandparent care families were dealing with and the needs of the children. And so if we can move to the next slide, you can see there that only 15% of the placements were state care placements with grandparents, and so many, as Jill has mentioned, they were facing terrible issues and much stress. If we go to the next slide, but what we learned about the children is what we were able to really hone in on and make a big noise in the media. And that's where I think we started to get really good traction. Now, in 2014, we did actually get quite a bit of additional support. And that was really because we had the ear of the then national government's Minister for Social Development, Paula Bennett. She was sympathetic to what we were trying to achieve because she had that personal experience of being a grandparent raising her grandchild for a time. And over the years, we had a number of politicians and MPs that approached us trying to see how they could support us. And really because they had seen what had come out of Jill's research, and then again in 2016 with the media coverage we got there. So the key point on this slide I want to highlight is that we were able to show that the reasons why children were in non-state kinship care were the same reasons as they were being placed into statutory care. It's just that statutory care placements were largely because there wasn't a person found within the family easily that they could place that child with. Not in all cases, but many cases, foster care was sort of the last resort. So it made it stronger for us to be able to say, look, these children have these needs. They're the same as children in state care. And when you get that kind of comparison and you can see that it's the same, then your argument is so much stronger for the support for those children in non-state care. Same reasons why children were being placed in state care and non-state care. Parental drug addiction was the most prevalent reason. So if we can go to the next slide. So where we are now, so we've had incremental changes to legislation over the years. We've now got almost parity with foster care allowance. We have become the voice of grandparent and whānau care, representing the largest group of kinship carers in New Zealand. And we've also, through the research, through the media coverage, through the support of champions in Parliament, we have been able to get to that policy table and help inform policy and social work practice. And that's been a really critical part in influencing the decisions made by government and by policymakers. And now, of course, there is a real appetite for change internationally. And if anyone's tuned into the recent day of general discussion on kinship care by the United Nations Children's Rights Committee, the focus is on kinship care. So the way forward really is springboarding off that focus. And if we can go to the next slide, this is a really detailed slide, and I've got two really detailed slides. I apologize, I've broken all the rules of PowerPoint. and the good thing is I've PDF this, and Thomas is able to make this available to you later to view in more detail. But that really shows the sort of the road that we took and the sectoral changes that happened along the way. If we go to the next slide, and that's even more detailed, but I want to highlight something in that slide, and that's the green box in the middle where you can see 2014 UCB OB recipients. We'd got in 2009, we'd got parity with the base rates, but 2014 is where we got additional support. So an establishment grant of $350 per child at the beginning of the placement, school and year startup payments every year for every child. There's a band ranging from 0 to 14 plus years, but it's up to $550 per child. And it really, really supports the ability to cover all those beginning of the year costs like uniforms and stationery costs, etc. And there's also an extraordinary care fund of $2,000 available per child for where they might be showing promise or facing difficulties. So we got there in 2014, and we also had a champion in Parliament, Tracy Martin, who became the Minister for Children in end of 2017. Now, she had approached us outside of government when she was an opposition MP, said, how can I help you? And we said, we want to, our members really wanted the clothing allowance that foster carers got. So she drafted a private member's bill for a clothing allowance, and miraculously, and we just thank our lucky stars, it got drawn in the ballot, and it proceeded through Parliament and finally was passed in 2015 with a delayed implementation to 2018. So that's been a massive increase in the level of support for grandparent caregivers who are not statutory caregivers. And then the next point I wanted to make was in July of this year, and this is really through us being at the table, through us informing policy at every step of the way, the government agreed to remove the 1-year eligibility rule for the unsupported child benefit and the orphans benefit. Now, that was critical because it meant that children placed in grandparents' care for temporary situations, they could get support. And previously they couldn't. They had to prove that they would be caring for more than 12 months. And the level of poverty that those families experienced really is borne out in the slides earlier, but it was dreadful. And we were lucky that we had that champion in Parliament who saw that, and all the data supported better support for these children because they have the same needs as children in state care. We go to the last slide. So this is our key takeaways for you, really to get the kind of support in Australia for like we have here, evidence the issues with quality research, emphasize, what the points I've made about the same reasons why children are in kinship care as in state care. The research really does, and the stories changes the hearts and minds of those in power. And we cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have a national strategy and a national voice. I know this is something that Meredith has raised earlier, and it is an important thing. We have a national voice because you know, we are just a much smaller country, and we've got one organisation that speaks loudly for grandparent and whānau carers, kinship carers. And you know, finding that hero and champion in Parliament is also really important. Getting the media on board and just being at the table to inform policy and law reform, and keep telling those kinship stories, and that really changes hearts and minds. So I hope that covers it all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kate and Jill. If anyone has any questions, please put them into the Q&A. While you're doing that, I'll just, we have received one comment, which I'll read out to everyone. So this is from someone who's attending today. I'm a grandparent raising a grandchild, also working in the foster care field in Australia. I migrated to Australia from New Zealand and was a member of the Grandparents Raising Grandchildren and follow their grandparents.
Oh,
and cannot express how supportive the group is and the support provided by the government by way of the unsupported child allowance. Going from a really robust support to pretty much nothing in Australia continues.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love the comment, I think, of the fantastic work we've heard a little bit about today, and I guess sets us up for where we potentially could be going from a very low base of the support currently provided in Australia.
Yep.
I think that's a wonderful comment,
Oh.
testament to all of your work, apparently. That's obviously the case. One of the questions I've got is, has there subsequently been a reduction in the number of children entering the statutory system as a result of this? So
Yes.
what we think happens at the moment is that children are becoming subject to child protection orders in order to access the supports that they need. And often it's quite unnecessary, that they don't need to enter statutory care in order to receive those supports and the support of the carers with whom they're living. So
Yes.
I'm just wondering if it's produced a big advantage in the number of children entering statutory care actually reducing.
Yes, sorry, Jill, I'm going to jump in here.
It's okay.
Absolutely, there has been a reduction, and in the last year to 30 June, actually to 30 June last year, it was just 1,700 children entered statutory care across New Zealand, compared to, you know, years before where it was, you know, significantly more. And there was a period where there were, you know, you had to have that statutory care in order to get the supports needed. We still have a way to go to getting all of the kinds of supports needed. And at the moment, the government is, and the policy team within Oranga Tamari is looking at what other supports are needed for children in non-statutory care, such as, you know, better access and the covering the cost of counselling and therapy and other supports. So there is and I'm sure Jill will pick up, probably want to talk on this, but the focus has changed around care.
It definitely has changed around care. And I was just going to say that one of the things that came out in the research and hasn't really been addressed are issues of housing. We have housing problems here anyway, but when grandparents suddenly have to take on 5 children, and some of them have moved, you know, downsized, and they suddenly find that they are in possession of these children, they really do need a hand up to be able to find suitable accommodation. And I know one grandparent said, we had to buy a caravan, we put the children outside in the caravan, then we were worried all night that they'd set fire to it or they weren't safe. You know, it's this sort of stuff. And it really has gone under the radar. So that's just one of the things. But yes, Kate, there's been a total turnaround. In fact, they did amend the Act. When was it, the 7AA, year before last?
2019, July 2019,
Right.
the emphasis on particularly Māori children, because 69% of children in state care are Māori, and the focus has been on ensuring that the outcomes for Māori children are improved, and there's a real focus away from taking them into the state care system and empowering the wider whānau iwi, the hapu iwi, to actually provide care for the children, but with support, from the state for the support needs.
And I think that we have to be really careful, or this is what was happening in the beginning, was that kinship care was seen as a cheap option. And it's not a cheap option. It is a safe option, and there's been a whole lot of myths around kinship care, such as the children, are being placed back into an abusive family and all this sort of stuff. Actually, the data tells us the opposite. The data tells us that children are more likely to be abused in foster care than in kinship care. So we've been through a period of actually having to change the perceptions of social workers and policymakers. And that's been an exciting journey. And I just have to say that I think grandparents raising grandchildren have gone from strength to strength. And I do know that we do have other kin also, and some of those people go to grandparents raising grandchildren. It was an issue that was raised before. They go to the grandparents raising grandchildren organisation because there is nothing else for them. But we also have to realise that this particular group has different needs as well. So so there's still work to be done, but I think that we can be quite proud, particularly under Kate's leadership, of where it's gone.
I would agree that you should be very proud. We're going to have to leave it there and go to the next presentation, but we'd welcome the opportunity to stay in touch with you, because you've given us a lot of good advice about things that we can continue on with. So we'd love to stay in touch with you as we continue on the journey and learn many lessons from you, I think. So thank you very, very much for your presentation today, and we'll stay in touch with you, I'm sure. And of course, for everyone who's watching, there will be the video of this presentation that will be made available to people along with the slides. So we'll get those to you within the next couple of weeks. But once again, thank you very, very much. It was very, very welcome addition to the program.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Jill. We were trustees in the very beginning together of GRG, and she's just been amazing support all the way through. So thank you.
Good. Thank you very much.